Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Do Not Falter Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. I need a sound check, but once I've got it, we're going straight into talking about matchups once again. This looks like it's probably laggy in some way. And the look of it always confuses me because I thought this game was rolled back and yet here it is looking kind of strange relative to that. This matchup is kind of rough because in order to fight it properly you have to have a really strong understanding of what Crusaders and Launchers' ranges are. This is particularly true because Launcher benefits the most in this matchup from using stuff she doesn't basically use that much in nearly any other. Because Crusader's moves don't reach full screen easily, and when he does, it's usually through that option, which doesn't actually set her up for much at long ranges, she has a lot of freedom that you might not expect her to have. But she can't just keep attacking all the time either. In general, trying to close in on this character is a problem. You don't generally want to do it that much. She gets a lot more out of convincing the opponent that she's not going to close in, and then using one of her options that prevents them from doing so. Even though Crusader can absolutely hit specific spaces in front of him, he doesn't actually close in to do a lot of damage from there if not given the option. This is one of the places where the standard parts of this matchup that we've covered before don't really come up as much. Turns out that was probably kind of laggy, so I guess they're done or something. I wonder why it was that laggy though. This looks like one of those spaces where it's not actually going to grab the next match for whatever reason. Oh, no, it just was taking quite a while. We're not going to be talking quite as much about as many things relative to movement or even expectations of the upcoming patch, despite the fact that the title of the stream does mention it and make it sound as if we're going to be taking this fairly seriously. So you can expect this stream to be a little more quiet, even if it has a lot of things going on playstyle-wise. We are in the process of finalizing and fixing up our King of Fighters Snow Angel bot, which should be available probably in about half an hour, if not less than that. So if you are a King of Fighters player and interested in that one and have finished training with our big fire bot, I expect to see that in a bit. This is always one of the most interesting matchups in my mind, because this matchup, now I have something I can talk about relative to the patch, I guess. This matchup, particularly between players who understand which combos they can and can't go for, embodies what I figured this game was going to be like. Those who are following this game as a generality probably know that, aside from the Crusader Infinite, most of the things that people see in this game that make it seem slightly questionable in terms of enjoyability weren't in the primary beta because the characters capable of those things weren't even available. In fact, the character most infamous now for being the troublesome one wasn't even in the game until the second beta. Throwing on top of that the relatively difficult aspects of Touch of Death combos from characters other than the ones that came later, you find yourself in the strange situation of being really interested in a game and then realizing there's specific things that have been added to that game that make it somewhat less enjoyable for you. This is not quite a complaint about the game itself, as it's not really a matter of complaining in the first place. If you watch these two fight, even a particularly good Dragon Knight or Striker, the things that they can do, even when they are difficult to understand to counter, once you've learned the counter, they're not necessarily so confusing or difficult to execute that you can't achieve it. Nor do they just basically have no counter, as some people would argue is the case for Swiftmaster. As terrifying as Dragon Knight can be under the right conditions, we were able to figure out what it takes to get through her fairly early on. It's a matter of learning at which point in her pressure, particularly corner pressure, to just roll forward, as the way she commits to her moves means that you get a lot of options there. And as you can see here, Grappler has even more options there, as he can just use moves if he really thinks he's going to get away with it. Similarly, even though for my own character it becomes a little more complicated in the sense that you often must choose between uppercutting and rolling, you are still getting to make a lot more choices than we do in certain other matchups. We did very much expect the long-range character of the game to basically be Hitman, but that is not how it worked out in the end. course, we don't often get a playable character that can literally full screen command grab you into 50% of your health and also stop time. While I don't expect this to change, it's not like they're going to take him out of the game suddenly or probably nerf too much of what he does as a whole. It is possible that they will make some differences, some changes in how he actually functions in terms of which routes of combos he needs to take, and in so doing, shift the perspective of the game from one in which you basically just get touched and deleted under nearly any circumstance where your opponent has full magic, back to where the betas were to a point, where at least the condition under which you just died was a lot more work to set up and therefore could be played around a little bit more. But again, this was very character and matchup dependent to begin with, so the difference is mainly that there are just more characters and more scenarios in which this is possible now. If any character gets their damage nerfed, I'm going to assume it's this one. Because he often feels as if someone just didn't bother making him not a boss. I went through a few of the complaints across Reddit at the moment for how the game works as a whole, but overall, there's no consensus because different people want different things out of fighting games. Fortunately, we can pretty much define what it was that we were looking for and what was so important about the way it worked when we didn't have characters like Lost Warrior to consider. If anything, my bigger issue here is that it's going to be kind of hard to get me to watch, like, future streams of this game, even for tournaments. Because regardless of player skill, the thing we did know from before, certainly, was that there was going to be a lot more thinking and explicitly playing to certain forms of offense in order to mislead the opponent so you could actually get damage. Whereas now it often ends up being a very safe style of play because everyone knows their optimal route and how to get there, but they also don't have to take too many risks to get to the position. In fact, generally waiting for your opponent to do so is your best bet. That said, this game does have a different style of appeal that you could pick it up for if you felt you were good at games in general, fighting games in particular. It is one of the few games out there that gives you all the way back to that feeling of every opponent you fight is a boss, but not because of being a reaction test, and not explicitly because of being an execution test either. They are a boss in the sense that you must understand their matchup and their patterns really well, and be able to both avoid their damage and do your own without messing up. Right here, for example, I'm pretty sure I know what to do, but if I misspace, that's 1/3 of health. That's normally another third, but not always. And the more you flow through the matches and the more you understand, the easier it is to keep control of situations or lose control of situations. The fortunate thing here is that I think that in the end that feeling doesn't really go away. Which is a strange feeling for many people to want to keep having, but some of us play games with almost exactly that purpose. Most of the time, the things happening in this game, other than, again, more or less Swiftmaster, aren't specifically unfair, they're just hard to understand, relative to whether or not you should do a specific thing in response to them or not. So hopefully they'll be able to, if not make the game feel closer to the original feeling, keep at least some of that going.
조심해라 당신. 이미 내 영역이 아니라고.
格の違いを教えてあげる。The Space Evolution Falter Challenger Round
가진 게 있으면 좀 더 보여달라고. 그 눈, 아직 죽지 않았군. 복수는 언제나 환영이다. 불을 잡는 건 조금 반칙 같아서 아무래도 망설여졌단 말이야. 조심해라 당신. 이미 내 영역이 아니라고.
格の違いを。The Space Evolution Falter Challenger
激化し
ランスインファイお疲れ様つわものを求めさすらう骨っぷしのあるやつね
今日しめら男子意味ねえよんやが見るぞ
The Space Evolution Imposter Challenger Round 1 Fight! つね
I wonder if the lag continued. There were like 3 people over there a moment ago. My silence was in pursuit of checking through all of the things for the bot release, and that should be going out fairly soon. This is a type of rushdown, right? The functional effectiveness of that Gatling gun in this matchup is never to be underestimated. Unfortunately, you can't do that much about it when you're just going to die in one hit. But if you can avoid dying in one hit, things are usually a little better. This particular matchup can make the game feel much more one-sided than it really is most of the time. But it is true that for either side, it's likely to feel very one-sided. You have to be particularly careful about making sure that every time you see a move happen, you are pretty clear on what's going to happen next. One of the reasons why it's probably a better idea to keep the rushdown going in this matchup is because there isn't really a position at which Launcher benefits from stopping her attack. Most of the things that Lost Warrior does, Launcher can't punish easily due to the types of normal she has and spacings, so she might as well more or less keep attacking. One thing that does come up that might help a little bit is being able to specifically use moves to dodge, as you've just seen, basically by launching fake attacks to get the opponent to go for counters that aren't going to work. Aside from that, you've got perfect instant jump setups and various nuke things where, in general, the player on the other side can't be absolutely sure what's happening, which is probably your best bet. Stuff like that. The better you get at it, the more likely it is that your opponent's going to sit still and eventually allow you to get a guard break. But most of us aren't quite that familiar with the feeling or concept of attacking for entirely no reason, with no expectation that the attack will actually hit at all. It's just there to make the opponent confused. It's particularly troublesome because when you do mistime those, it can feel really, really frustrating, as you really didn't quote-unquote need to make the attack other than to keep your stuff going. But it is because of things like this that we are so incredibly interested to see exactly what they will choose to change. Hopefully we will at least get to keep our crazy boss battles, though. And they'll find some way to make them generally more fun.
私の思いの方が強かったようだ。
내게 그렇게 가까이 있다가 옷깃을 잡힌다고?
When actually using pressure on Kunoichi, there's a lot of knowledge checks in the build of the flow that any given player must pretty much learn all of in terms of their own character's options. But if you come from other games where your options in those spaces are a little faster, it can be kind of frustrating in this game to spend your time trying to find the right one. In general, you should just roll when you think it's done and assume that's going to work by itself. There's also benefits for understanding when she's too close to you, and therefore you can get your benefits that way. If worse comes to worse, just uppercut. Because it is true that by design, you aren't going to be able to keep track of her too much, and raw power is often your better option whenever you can try to use it. Simply think of her as a character who has enough finesse that if you try to beat it with your own, you would need to have a similarly finessed character, which is uncommon in the game so far. The few times that raw power does not work, it's usually because you've been tricked in some way relative to positioning. And if you couldn't be tricked by that, she wouldn't have much capacity to fight in the first place. Also, your block button is important because I have complete control over whether or not she side switches, and she still crosses up even if she side switches. We now go into what is our last on-stream match of the night. As there's no one other than us in the lounge, there's a good chance that it will be closing up somewhat soon, but not immediately. Too far. You should be able to go and get that bot at our website 2-mk.org. That one bot covers 5 characters, so feel free to put it in if you've gotten past and done enough with the previous one, which also covered 5 or 6 characters. Tomorrow you can join us for our Mishmashing Battle Lounge in Street Fighter V. And more patched Melty Blood type Lumina on Tuesday, with the Tuesday Melt. I think we're having that. I'm not absolutely sure because ECT preparations for certain team members means that they will not be available, and as noted, this will probably seriously diminish the amount of actual stuff you see. And that brings us to the end of our stream for tonight. Check out our bot information, rather announcements to any updates we do, and all next week, news leading up to ECT on our Twitter _MK_FGC. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.